A poor mother sold her house to pay for her daughter's education. Years later, the daughter returns with a stranger, and upon seeing him, the mother is left in shock. The clock struck 6 in the morning when Margaret turned off the alarm with trembling hands. She lay in bed for a few seconds, staring at the ceiling of the small room where she had grown up. The same room where her daughter Emma now slept, having come home late from work the night before. This day would not be like the others. In her chest, she felt a mix of pride and pain that she couldn't fully comprehend. With silent steps, Margaret went to the kitchen and brewed coffee. On the table lay the white envelope that had arrived a week earlier, Emma's acceptance letter to university. She had read it so many times that the corners were already bent. Each word represented a promise, a dream becoming reality. But it also felt like a sentence. The money was insufficient to cover the tuition or housing in the capital. Margaret sat down, gazing at the envelope with tired eyes. The house that had belonged to her family for generations was all she had of value. Selling it would mean giving up her only refuge, her memories. The sacrifice terrified her, but she knew there was no other option. If I do this, my daughter will have a chance. And that's all that matters, she thought. A few minutes later, Emma came down the stairs, still half asleep. "Are you awake, Mom?" she asked, surprised to see her sitting up so early. "Yes, dear, I was just thinking about some things." Margaret smiled, but inside she struggled with what she was about to say. While Emma prepared her breakfast, Margaret looked at her fondly. She was a smart and hard-working girl, always focused on a better future. She had worked so hard to get to where she was. Margaret was prouder of her than anyone else. "Emma," Margaret finally said, her voice low, "I want you to know how proud I am of you. No matter what happens, I always will be." Emma stopped stirring her spoon and looked up, noticing her mother's serious tone. "Mom, is everything okay?" Margaret took a deep breath and gathered her courage. "Yes, honey. It's just that I've been thinking a lot these days. I know attending that university is very important to you, and I want you to know that I will do whatever it takes to make it happen." "What do you mean?" Emma asked, concerned. Margaret paused for a moment to choose her words carefully. "I'm going to sell the house. That will give us enough money for you to start university without worries." Emma's face filled with shock. "Mom, no! You can't sell the house. It's all we have." Margaret gently caressed her cheek. "Sweetheart, this house is just a place. You are my true home, and I want you to have the life you've always dreamed of." Emma fell silent, processing her mother's words. She knew how much that house meant to Margaret. "I don't want you to do this for me. That's exactly why I will. Because I want to give you an opportunity that I never had." They embraced silently. Emma tried to hold back her tears, but felt her mother trembling slightly as she held her. The weight of the decision was clear for both, but so was the unconditional love that bound them. Later that day, Margaret called Ethan, her friend and neighbor, to ask for help with the move. Ethan, a kind-eyed young man with strong hands, arrived without asking questions. "Are you sure about this, Margaret?" he asked as he loaded the first boxes. "I have no other option, Ethan. It's the best for Emma." Ethan nodded in understanding. He knew how hard it was for Margaret to leave the house, but he also recognized the determination that drove her. With Ethan's help, the move was quick, although each step felt like tearing a piece of Margaret's soul away. Doña Carmen, their lifelong neighbor, said goodbye to Margaret with a tight hug. "You are a brave mother, Margaret. Your daughter will see one day everything you are doing for her." Margaret smiled sadly, hoping that would be true. When she closed the door of the house for the last time, she felt a lump in her throat. However, as she turned the key and handed it to the new owner, she decided there was no room for regret. Every sacrifice would be worth it if it meant a better future for Emma. That night, in the small apartment where they would now live, Margaret sat on the edge of her bed, and looked at a photo of her daughter at her high school graduation. With tears in her eyes but a serene smile, she told herself, "I did the right thing." Margaret woke up early, unable to sleep more than a few hours. It was moving day, the day she would say goodbye forever to the place where she had spent her whole life. As she walked through the empty rooms of the house, her mind filled with memories. Emma's laughter echoing through the halls as a child, the afternoons spent in the kitchen with her mother, and the nights she had silently wept after losing her husband. With a sigh, Margaret tried to push those thoughts aside. She couldn't afford to doubt now. She had made the hardest decision of her life out of love for her daughter, and she had to move forward. Ethan arrived shortly after, accompanied by his sick mother, who insisted on saying goodbye to Margaret. Gently, Ethan helped his mother sit in a chair under the porch. "Carmen, are you sure you're not tired?" Ethan asked lovingly. "I wouldn't leave without saying goodbye to Margaret. This house is part of us," Carmen replied with a nostalgic smile. Margaret went to meet them, excited by the visit from her lifelong neighbor. The elderly woman hugged her as tightly as she could. "Dear, don't cry. A mother does what she has to do," Carmen whispered in her ear. Margaret felt her eyes welling up with tears, but she forced herself to smile. There was still much to do before saying goodbye for good. Ethan and Emma began loading the boxes with what little Margaret had decided to take to the rented apartment. Each object they packed held a memory, and leaving so many things behind felt like leaving pieces of a life. Margaret watched in silence as Ethan carefully arranged the boxes in his truck. Meanwhile, Emma tried to appear strong, but the emotional weight was slowly overcoming her. When she stepped into her old room one last time, she scanned the bare walls where her drawings and photos had hung. She knelt on the floor and caressed a piece of the wooden floor, as if that gesture could help her say goodbye to her childhood. "I'm sorry, Mum," she whispered in a moment of weakness. Margaret heard her from the doorway, but chose not to interrupt. She knew Emma was dealing with her own emotions. The sacrifice of selling the house wasn't just hers, it was also her daughter's. When the boxes were loaded, Margaret asked for a few moments alone in the house. She walked slowly through each room, recalling moments that would never return. In the kitchen, where her mother had taught her to cook, she allowed herself one last minute of nostalgia. Then, in the living room, she touched the window through which she had gazed at the neighborhood on rainy afternoons. Finally, she reached the porch, where Doña Carmen and Ethan waited for her. Closing that door would mean closing a chapter of her life forever. "It's just a house, Margaret," Ethan reminded her, trying to ease the weight of her pain. "I know, but it was our home," Margaret replied with a sad smile. With a heavy heart, Margaret approached Doña Carmen to say goodbye. "Thank you for everything, Carmen. I don't know what I would have done without you," Margaret said sincerely. The elderly woman took her hands and held them tightly. "Dear, this is just the beginning. What you are doing today is the greatest act of love a mother can make. Emma will understand, maybe not today, but one day, and she will know that you did it all for her." Margaret nodded with tears in her eyes, feeling that those words gave her the strength to move forward. They got into Ethan's truck. The ride to the small apartment was silent, each lost in their thoughts. Emma looked out the window, unable to say goodbye to the neighborhood that had seen her grow up. Margaret, on the other hand, kept her gaze fixed ahead, as if looking only to the future could prevent her heart from breaking into pieces. When they arrived at the new apartment, Ethan and Emma began unloading the boxes. The place was small and modest, but Margaret tried to see it as a new beginning. Placing each item in its place would be the first of many tasks on this unknown journey. Ethan stayed until well into the night, making sure Margaret and Emma were comfortable. "If you need anything, just call me, okay?" Ethan said, placing the last box in the living room. "Thank you, Ethan. I really appreciate it," Margaret replied, grateful to have such a loyal friend in difficult times. When Ethan left and Emma went to bed early, Margaret sat on the small sofa in the living room. The place was still messy, with boxes everywhere, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that her daughter was one step closer to her future. Holding a photo of Emma in her hands, Margaret whispered softly, "I would do anything for you, daughter. Anything." She allowed herself to shed a few tears in that moment of solitude, knowing that the hardest decision was now behind her. All that was left was to move forward, step by step, with the hope that someday all this sacrifice would be rewarded. The train to the capital sped along, leaving behind the fields and hills of the small town where Emma had grown up. The young woman gazed out the window, with a heart torn between the excitement of starting a new chapter and the nostalgia of leaving her mother behind. Though her backpack was filled with books and clothes, the real weight was in her chest, carrying the image of Margaret saying goodbye at the station, smiling with tears in her eyes. When the train arrived at the central station, Emma felt overwhelmed by the hustle and bustle of the city. Everything seemed bigger, faster, and more expensive than she had ever imagined. Dragging her suitcase through the crowded streets, she finally found the small student apartment she had rented. It was modest, just a room with a bed, a desk, and a window facing an alley. But for Emma, it represented independence and an opportunity to prove that her mother's sacrifice had not been in vain. Her first day at university was a mix of emotions. Emma entered the campus with nerves running high. The facilities were impressive, with ancient stone buildings, well-kept gardens, and students who looked like they had stepped out of a magazine. Emma tried not to feel out of place, but it was hard not to compare herself to others. Many wore designer clothes and carried expensive bags that cost more than her monthly rent. Emma sat in the front row of her introductory class, taking notes with enthusiasm. She knew she had to work twice as hard to stand out and make every penny her mother had invested worthwhile. But she couldn't help feeling lonely, surrounded by people living a reality so different from hers. During the break, as Emma flipped through a book in the garden, a carefree voice interrupted her. "Are you new here? I hadn't seen you before." Emma looked up to find Samantha, a tall girl with perfectly wavy hair and a natural air of confidence. Samantha wore a friendly smile, but her eyes sparkled with a mix of curiosity and superiority. "Yes, it's my first semester," Emma replied, a bit shy. "Perfect, just what I needed. A new friend," Samantha said enthusiastically, sitting next to her without waiting for an invitation. Emma was surprised by Samantha's spontaneity, but she also felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time since arriving at university, someone was talking to her without judgment or probing looks. "Come on, I have to introduce you to my friends," Samantha said, pulling Emma's hand. Samantha took Emma to a stylish cafe near campus, where a group of young people gathered around a table full of lattes and expensive pastries. They all seemed relaxed, talking about trips abroad and exclusive concerts. Emma felt as if she had stepped into a parallel world, one of luxury and privilege that she had never known. "And you, Emma?" asked one of the guys in the group. "Do you come from a well-known family?" Emma felt her stomach tighten. She didn't want to lie, but she also didn't want to tell the truth. "I'm from the countryside. My mum works hard so I can be here," she said with a tense smile. The group stared at her for a moment, but Samantha quickly changed the subject, preventing the conversation from becoming awkward. "Emma is great, you'll see. We're going to adopt her into our group," Samantha announced with a mischievous grin. Emma felt a momentary relief, though deep down she knew she didn't quite fit in. But at that moment, the company was welcome. If being accepted by them meant adapting to their lifestyle, she was willing to give it a try. That night, as Emma returned to the apartment, she received a call from Margaret. Her heart fluttered with joy and guilt upon seeing her mother's name on the screen. "Hi, Mom," Emma said, trying to sound cheerful. "How was your first day, daughter?" Margaret asked affectionately. Emma briefly described the classes and the campus, omitting the details about her encounter with Samantha and her group. She didn't want to worry her mother with trivial things. Margaret, for her part, listened joyfully, feeling that every word from her daughter was a reward for all the sacrifices she had made. "I'm so glad to hear you're doing well, honey. I miss you so much," Margaret sighed. "I miss you too, Mum. I promise I'll call you every day," Emma replied, although deep down she knew it wouldn't be easy to keep that promise. After hanging up, Emma stared at her phone for a moment. She knew her mother loved her unconditionally, but she also felt the weight of the expectations placed on her. She didn't want to disappoint her, but the atmosphere at university was more challenging than she had imagined. That night, as she tried to fall asleep, thoughts crowded her mind. The joy of having found friends and the fear of not measuring up. Could she maintain a balance between two such different worlds? Weeks passed quickly, and Emma gradually adapted to university life. Her days were filled with classes, assignments, and meetings with new friends, while her nights were spent at parties and long conversations in trendy cafes. Without realizing it, her calls to Margaret began to space out more and more. Every time she looked at her phone, a wave of guilt washed over her, but she always found an excuse. "I'm tired. I'll call her later. It's not that urgent." In her eagerness to integrate into her new social circle, Emma began to feel trapped in a race to keep up with her peers. Social expectations pushed her toward expenses she couldn't afford: a new dress for a party, an expensive handbag that seemed essential to fit in. The money Margaret had worked so hard to save was quickly running out. At first, she tried to control herself, but the pressure to not feel inferior was stronger than her self-control. "You can't keep going around with that backpack, honey," Samantha said with a smile as she adjusted her designer bag. "Come on, let's go shopping. I'll take you." Emma, though she knew her budget was tight, accepted. Every expense felt like a small betrayal of her mother's sacrifices, but the shame of standing out for her simplicity pushed her to keep going. That night, after an outing with Samantha and her group, Emma received a call from Margaret. Seeing the name on the screen made her stomach tighten. She knew she had been avoiding talking to her mother for several days. "Hi, Mum," she answered quickly, trying to sound cheerful. "Emma, finally. I was worried about you, honey. Are you okay?" Margaret asked, relieved, but with a tone of concern. "Yes, Mum. Sorry for not calling you sooner. I've been really busy with classes and all this is new to me." She tried to sound casual, but felt that each word sank her deeper into guilt. "I understand, daughter. I just wanted to know how you're doing." "I miss you a lot," Margaret said softly. "I miss you too, Mum. But everything's fine here. Let's talk another day, okay? I'm tired." Margaret fell silent for a moment. She knew her daughter was hiding something from her, but she didn't want to push. "Of course, daughter. Rest. I love you." "I love you too, Mom," Emma quickly replied before hanging up. After hanging up, Emma let out a sigh of relief. Talking to Margaret reminded her of the life she had left behind, and the comparison with her new environment was too painful. She preferred to avoid those kinds of conversations, even though she knew her mother would notice. In the small rented apartment, Margaret stared at her phone in silence. She knew something was changing in her daughter, even if she couldn't pinpoint exactly what it was. The brief calls, the evasive answers. Emma was different, and it broke her heart. However, Margaret didn't want to appear controlling. She decided to attribute the distance to the fast pace of university life. "It's normal, right?" she told herself, although the emptiness in her chest said otherwise. The next day, Ethan stopped by Margaret's apartment to drop off some fresh vegetables from the market. He noticed that Margaret seemed quieter than usual. "Everything okay, Margaret?" he asked as he placed the bags on the table. "Yes, everything's fine," Margaret replied, trying to sound calm. But Ethan knew that expression on her face. It was the sadness of a mother who feared losing her connection with her daughter. "How's Emma? Has she adjusted yet?" Ethan tried to cheer her up. Margaret smiled sadly. "It seems so. She's busy with her studies. She hardly has time to call me. Ethan sat next to her and placed a hand on her shoulder. It's normal for her to need some time to adjust, but you know what you mean to her. She'll come back to you when she needs to. Margaret nodded, grateful for her friend's words, but deep down she couldn't help wondering if the distance with Emma would be temporary, or if her daughter was drifting away for good. That night, while reviewing her notes in her small room, Emma felt a pang of nostalgia. She remembered the nights she had studied alongside Margaret, drinking cheap coffee and talking about the future. Now that future was here, but she felt lonelier than she had ever imagined. She tried to distract herself by scrolling through social media, but every photo of Samantha and her friends seemed to remind her that she didn't quite belong in that world. Caught between luxury and social expectations, she was losing herself. She decided to send her mother a message. "I'm okay, Mom. I love you very much." Margaret received the message while preparing dinner. She smiled at reading it, but knew that those words couldn't replace the sound of her daughter's voice. With each passing day, contact between mother and daughter became scarcer. Emma was diving deeper into her university life, trying to fit in, while Margaret faced her loneliness with the resignation of a mother who loves unconditionally. The distance between them grew silently but relentlessly, and neither knew how to bridge it. Emma had been at university for several months, and the pressure to fit into her new environment was more intense than ever. Parties, trips, and gatherings at fancy restaurants had become part of her routine, and it was becoming increasingly difficult for her to maintain the appearance of someone who belonged in that world. The savings Margaret had worked so hard to accumulate were quickly dwindling, but Emma didn't want to accept that she was getting into trouble. "Come on, Emma. You have to come to the party on Friday," Samantha insisted one afternoon as they flipped through clothing catalogs at a cafe. "I don't know if I can..." "I'm low on money," Emma confessed, feeling the weight of shame in her words. Samantha looked at her with a carefree smile. "That's not a problem, darling. I know a place where we can find something perfect, and you don't have to pay it all now." Emma hesitated for a moment, but the thought of missing out on an opportunity to socialize with the group terrified her more than the debt. Every day she felt her identity as the girl from the town slipping away, and she was determined not to feel out of place again. That night, Samantha took her to an exclusive store that offered interest-free installment payments. Emma chose an elegant dress, unable to resist the feeling of belonging for the first time in that world. But every debt she incurred was an invisible chain that tied her more to the expectations of the environment she had chosen. Upon arriving at the apartment, Emma looked at herself in the mirror wearing the dress. For a moment she felt beautiful and confident, but deep down she knew something was wrong. The reflection showed someone desperately trying to be someone else. That same night, Margaret tried to call Emma. After several unanswered attempts, she decided to send her a message. "Daughter, I just want to know if you're okay. Call me when you can." Emma saw the notification on her phone as she was putting on makeup for the party. Guilt hit her hard, but she decided to ignore it for the moment. "I'll call her later," she told herself, knowing she was lying. The party was in a luxury penthouse with spectacular views of the city. The music, alcohol, and neon lights created an atmosphere that intoxicated the senses, and Emma let herself get carried away, trying to forget her worries. Samantha introduced her to several influential people, and for a few hours, Emma felt she had finally found her place. However, during the party, Emma inadvertently overheard a conversation between two members of the group. "Did you see Emma's dress? I bet she bought it on installments. She doesn't seem like the type who can really afford it," one of them mocked. Emma felt a wave of embarrassment wash over her, even though she pretended not to have heard anything. For the first time, she understood that no matter how hard she tried, she would never truly be part of that world. She was trapped in a game she couldn't win. Back at the party, Emma found herself alone with Samantha, who noticed something was off. "What's wrong, dear? You look worried," Samantha asked with a sweeter tone than usual. "Nothing. It's just that..." "I don't know if I fit in here," Emma admitted, letting out some of the anguish she had bottled up. Samantha wrapped an arm around her and smiled. "You know what? Everyone here feels the same way, but no one admits it. The key is to act like you have it all under control, even when you don't." For a moment, Samantha's words gave her some comfort. But deep down, Emma knew that the distance between who she pretended to be and who she truly was grew every day. In the small rented apartment, Margaret stared at her phone in the dark, waiting for a response that never came. Each day without news from Emma was a wound that opened wider. She knew her daughter was busy, but the silence was beginning to scare her. That night, she decided to call Ethan to talk about her concerns. "What if she feels overwhelmed and doesn't know how to tell me?" Margaret asked with a trembling voice. Ethan, although worried too, tried to reassure her. "Emma is fine, Margaret. Sometimes young people need their space. Give her time. She knows she can count on you." Margaret nodded, though in her heart, the unease continued to grow like a shadow that was hard to ignore. Back at the party, while Emma smiled and danced, she felt the guilt of not having responded to her mother lurking silently. Every time she tried to enjoy her new life, the image of Margaret crept into her thoughts. But instead of confronting that feeling, she decided to bury it deeper. When she returned home, Emma promised she would call her mother the next day. But when morning came, the worries of daily life dragged her down once again, and the call, like so many other things, was forgotten. Days continued to pass, and Emma delved deeper into her new university life. The debts began to pile up, and the pressure to maintain appearances grew heavier. Although she tried to ignore her inner warnings, each new expense was another step closer to the abyss. The unanswered call from her mother echoed in her mind like an uncomfortable reminder, but constant distractions kept her busy. One afternoon, as she left class, Emma ran into Victor again at a nearby cafe. He was impeccably dressed and exuded confidence, as if everything around him was under control. Victor radiated a dangerous calm, a security that attracted those who felt lost or out of place, and Emma was no exception. "Do we know each other?" Emma asked, trying to remember where she had seen him before. "Not yet," Victor replied with a seductive smile. "But I've heard about you, Emma." It wasn't long before Victor made her a seemingly innocent offer. "If you need anything at all, don't hesitate to call me. Sometimes we all need a little help." Emma felt a chill, but the promise that someone might offer her the stability she so craved was tempting. With a polite smile, she saved his number, unaware that this encounter would mark the beginning of a dangerous change in her life. That same week, Margaret received a brief message from Emma, almost as if it had been written out of obligation. "I'm fine, Mom. Everything's okay here. Don't worry." Margaret stared at the message for several seconds, feeling that the words didn't match reality. There was something empty in those lines, something telling her that her daughter wasn't as well as she claimed. But how could she reach out without pushing Emma further away? She decided to leave a voice message. "Honey, I don't want to bother you. I just want you to know that I'm here for whatever you need. I love you very much. Call me when you can." Margaret's nights grew longer and lonelier, and although she tried to occupy herself with work and visits from Ethan, the worry for Emma felt like a constant shadow. Ethan noticed it too. "You should visit her, Margaret," he suggested one afternoon over coffee. "Sometimes all we need is a mum's hug." Margaret smiled, although she didn't feel entirely sure. She feared that showing up unannounced might push Emma even further away. In the following weeks, Victor began to appear more frequently in Emma's life, always at opportune moments, after a bad grade, following a disagreement with Samantha, or on nights when the weight of the debts overwhelmed her. Whenever he appeared, he brought simple, seemingly selfless solutions. "Need help with payments? Don't worry, I'll take care of it. You can pay me back whenever you can," he would say, downplaying the situation. Emma started accepting his help almost without realizing it. Each loan and favor pulled her deeper into a web of dependency that she still couldn't see clearly. One night, while organizing her finances, Emma realized she wouldn't be able to cover the upcoming rent payments. The money had evaporated among parties, clothes, and unnecessary expenses. In her desperation, she thought of calling Margaret, but the shame was stronger than the need. At that moment, a message from Victor arrived. "Everything okay? I'm nearby if you need anything." Emma hesitated for a moment but ended up responding. That night, without realizing it, Emma took the first step into a more dangerous and controlling relationship with Victor. He welcomed her warmly, offered to pay off her debt, and although she tried to resist, she ultimately accepted his offer. "We're on the same team, Emma. You can trust me," Victor assured her, with a smile that, despite its warmth, hid darker intentions. From her small apartment, Margaret felt that something was slowly breaking between her and her daughter. Every time she tried to talk to Emma, the calls became shorter and the responses more evasive. One night, she decided to look up Ethan's number. "Could you help me get in touch with one of Emma's classmates?" she asked, worried. Ethan, though he knew Margaret was suffering, tried to calm her. "Margaret, you can't control everything. Maybe she needs space, but I'm here for whatever you need." Margaret hung up, grateful for Ethan's support, but the weight of concern remained. She knew her daughter was in trouble, even if she couldn't quite decipher what it was. Emma began to feel cornered by her debts. Each day was a new battle to maintain appearances and hide her financial situation. The promises she had made to herself, like calling Margaret more often or cutting back on expenses, were fading amid social commitments and the pressure to fit in. And it was in that moment of vulnerability that Victor reappeared in her life. After classes, while Emma reviewed her bank statements on her phone in frustration, she received an unexpected message. "Coffee this afternoon? I want you to meet someone important." It was Victor. Although a part of her hesitated, the temptation of finding a temporary solution in him was stronger. Emma convinced herself that accepting that invitation wasn't dangerous. After all, Victor hadn't asked for anything in return, yet. They arrived at an elegant cafe near campus. Victor was waiting for her at a table on the terrace, smiling as if he knew all the secrets of the world. "You look stressed, Emma. Are you okay?" he asked softly as he offered her a coffee. "Yes, well, not entirely," Emma admitted, looking down. "Things have been complicated lately." Victor responded without missing a beat, maintaining his calculated calm. "I can help you. You know you can count on me for whatever you need." Emma knew she shouldn't accept. Something inside her warned that while Victor offered help selflessly, there was a hidden price. However, the immediate feeling of relief was stronger than any suspicion. Days after that meeting, Emma returned to her apartment and found a package waiting at the door. Upon opening it, she discovered an elegant designer handbag with a note from Victor. "For you to not worry about how others see you. I want you to shine like you deserve." Emma felt a mix of emotions: gratitude, excitement, and a growing discomfort. She knew accepting such gifts wasn't right, but the need to feel valued and appreciated was stronger than her common sense. Besides, no one else offered her that kind of attention. When Samantha saw the bag at the next party, the acceptance Emma had been seeking finally arrived. The envious glances from the other girls gave her a fleeting sense of belonging. For a moment, she felt she had made the right choice. Meanwhile, Margaret continued to face her own emotional struggle. Each day that passed without hearing Emma's voice felt like a thorn in her heart. She knew her daughter was busy, but something told her there was more to her silence. The calls remained brief, and although she tried to stay positive, each conversation with Emma left Margaret with more questions than answers. One day, after several unanswered calls, Margaret left a message. "Honey, I just want to know if you're okay. Remember that you can always count on me no matter what. I love you very much." She hung up with a lump in her throat. It was frustrating not knowing how to approach her daughter without invading her space, but fear grew with each passing day. As the relationship between Victor and Emma became closer, the first signs of Victor's true character began to surface. One night, during dinner at an exclusive restaurant, Victor made a seemingly casual remark. "I like to know where you're going and who you're with. That way I can make sure you're always safe." Though his words sounded protective, the tone was unsettling. Emma felt a slight shiver, but decided to ignore it. She was convinced Victor only wanted the best for her. Little by little, Victor began to control small aspects of Emma's life, like suggesting what clothes to wear or which parties to attend. Each of his gestures seemed kind on the surface, but there was an underlying current of control that Emma still couldn't identify. In Margaret's small apartment, Ethan remained her greatest support. One afternoon, while having coffee in the kitchen, Margaret confessed her worries. "Ethan, I feel like Emma is drifting further away. She's not the same. She barely calls me, and when she does, I feel like she's hiding something." Ethan nodded, understanding. "Maybe it's just the adjustment, Margaret. University can be overwhelming. But I understand how you feel." Ethan was also beginning to notice the emotional weight that the distance was having on Margaret. He knew that even though she tried to be strong, the situation was affecting her deeply. "I'll try to talk to her more often. Maybe she needs to know she's not alone," Ethan added. Each day, Victor's presence in Emma's life grew stronger. He offered solutions to all her problems, from rent to debts, and although Emma tried to maintain some distance, the comfort of his support enveloped her like an invisible trap. One night, after receiving another loan, Victor said to her, "You don't have to worry about anything, Emma. Just make sure you don't drift away from me. I'm here to take care of you." Emma felt a pang of discomfort, but she told herself that Victor only wanted to protect her. She didn't see, or perhaps didn't want to see, that each favor pulled her deeper into a web of control. Weeks went by, and Emma found herself increasingly trapped. Victor's favors and loans piled up like an impossible mountain to climb, but he always appeared understanding and willing to help her. Whenever she tried to pull away, he found a way to remind her that he was doing it for her own good. During a dinner at Samantha's house, Emma felt more out of place than ever. Everyone talked about their upcoming vacations to exotic destinations, sharing luxury stories that made her feel small. Despite the expensive dress and jewelry Victor had given her, she knew she was still the girl from the town in their eyes. "And you, Emma? What are you doing for vacation?" Samantha asked, smiling with curiosity. Emma hesitated, feeling everyone's gaze fall on her. "I'm thinking about traveling too, but I haven't decided where yet," she responded with a forced smile. It was a lie, and the guilt settled like a stone in her stomach. After dinner, Samantha caught her at the door. "Don't worry about those things, darling. If you need anything, you know who can help you," she said, clearly referring to Victor. That night, as she reviewed her expenses and watched her debts grow, Emma received a message from Victor. "How was dinner? Everything okay?" The precision with which Victor knew every detail of her life was starting to feel unsettling, but Emma decided to ignore it. She needed him, and he was always there to cover any need. The next day, Victor invited her to breakfast. During their conversation, he seemed closer than ever, but his tone was more invasive. "Why didn't you tell me you were having trouble paying rent?" he asked, staring at her. Emma tried to defend herself. "I didn't want to bother you. I can handle it myself." Victor smiled softly, but his words were firm. "You don't have to handle it alone, Emma. But remember that when someone takes care of you, they also expect you to trust them." That comment was a warning disguised as kindness. Victor was drawing a line, demanding more control over Emma's life. Meanwhile, Margaret continued to wait anxiously for a chance to talk to her daughter. Each day, without news, felt like a wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. She tried calling several times, but always received brief, evasive responses. The concern was beginning to turn into fear. Finally, one day, Margaret decided to send a long and sincere message. "Emma, daughter, I know you're busy, but please don't forget me. I'm here for you, always. No matter what happens, you'll never be alone. I love you more than I can explain." She waited for hours for a response, but silence was the only reply she received. She knew something was wrong, but she didn't know how to help her daughter without pushing her further away. Worried about Margaret's emotional state, Ethan visited her more frequently. He knew she was carrying a heavy burden, and although she tried to be strong, the situation was affecting her deeply. "Have you thought about seeing her without warning?" Ethan asked one afternoon while they shared coffee in the kitchen. "I don't want her to feel like I'm spying on her or pressuring her," Margaret replied, her eyes filled with concern. "I just want her to know I'm here for her, no matter what happens." Ethan nodded, understanding the delicate situation. "Whatever you do, Margaret, you know you're not alone. I'll be here, no matter what." After another meeting with Victor, Emma began to feel that her dependence on him was inevitable. She had crossed a point of no return. Every time she tried to solve things on her own, Victor appeared with a quick solution that made her feel safe, albeit trapped. One night, while reviewing her expenses, Emma realized she wouldn't be able to cover the next tuition payment. Parties, clothes, and impromptu trips had brought her to the brink of financial disaster. Desperate, she called Victor. "I need your help again, for the tuition." Victor showed no surprise. "I knew this would happen sooner or later. Don't worry, I'll take care of it," he replied in a reassuring voice. But this time, his tone hinted at something more, the expectation that Emma owed him much more than gratitude. After weeks of silence, Margaret made the decision to visit Emma unannounced. The constant evasions and increasingly cold responses from her daughter had convinced her that she couldn't wait any longer. Ethan, always willing to help, offered to drive her to the capital. "Are you sure about this, Margaret?" Ethan asked as they hit the road. "Yes, I can't keep waiting. Something isn't right, and I need to see my daughter," Margaret replied determinedly, even though her heart was filled with anxiety. The city was a world completely different from Margaret's small town. The tall buildings, bustling streets, and fast pace overwhelmed her, but she focused on her goal, seeing Emma and ensuring she was okay. When they arrived at her daughter's apartment, Margaret took a deep breath before ringing the bell. The silence on the other side felt eternal. Finally, she heard footsteps, and the door opened, revealing a surprised Emma. "Mom, what are you doing here?" Emma asked, clearly uncomfortable. "I came to see you, honey. I've called you so many times. I needed to know you're okay," Margaret said, trying to hide her concern. Emma bit her lip, clearly uneasy about her mother's unexpected visit. The weight of her new life, the debts, and her relationship with Victor made her feel like Margaret was an intruder in a reality she was trying to keep hidden. "I'm fine, Mum. I've just been busy," Emma replied, avoiding her mother's gaze. "Can I come in?" "I don't want to bother you. I just want to spend some time with you," Margaret insisted, with a gentle smile but filled with worry. After a moment of hesitation, Emma let her mother in. As Margaret observed the small apartment, she noticed details that disturbed her. Expensive clothes scattered on a chair, bags from exclusive stores, and a designer handbag on the table. Margaret knew all of that was beyond her daughter's reach. Before she could say anything, the doorbell rang again. Emma went to answer, and to Margaret's surprise, Victor appeared, holding a bottle of wine and wearing a calm yet calculating expression. "Who is that?" Margaret asked quietly, feeling a chill run down her spine. Emma tensed instantly. "Mum, this is Victor. A friend. He's been helping me with some things." Victor smiled politely, but Margaret noticed something dark in his gaze, as if he had the situation under control the moment he walked in. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Margaret. Emma has told me a lot about you," said Victor, extending his hand. Margaret felt a knot in her stomach but shook his hand firmly. "Thank you for helping my daughter." although I don't know why she needed so much help, Margaret replied, trying to conceal her distrust. As Victor and Emma conversed, Margaret observed every detail. She noted how Victor behaved with an unsettling familiarity, as if he had more influence over Emma than her daughter admitted. Emma seemed nervous, avoiding eye contact with her mother and quickly changing the subject whenever Margaret tried to ask personal questions. During the conversation, Victor began to show his subtle control. He commented on how he had helped Emma with her rent, her studies, and even some nice things she needed to fit in at university. It's hard to survive here alone. Fortunately, Emma doesn't have to worry about that with me around, Victor said, looking at Margaret with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Margaret felt a chill. She understood what was happening. Victor had woven a web of dependency in which Emma was trapped, and he had done it so subtly that her daughter didn't even realize it. When Victor stepped out for a moment to take a call, Margaret seized the opportunity. "What's going on here, Emma? Why does this man have so much control over your life?" Margaret asked, unable to contain her concern. Emma crossed her arms defensively. "It's not what it looks like, Mom. Victor is just helping me. I need his support right now." "His support or his control?" Margaret responded, her heart tightening. "Honey, you can't depend on someone like that. It's not safe." Emma felt the world divide between her mother and Victor. She knew Margaret was right, but admitting it would mean accepting that she had made mistakes she didn't know how to correct. "Mom, you don't understand. Things here are different. I need to stay afloat, and he's the only one who has really supported me," Emma said, her voice cracking. Margaret tried to get closer, but Emma stepped back, feeling caught between loyalty to her mother and dependence on Victor. Victor returned just then, sensing the tension in the air. "Everything okay here?" he asked with a studied smile. Emma nodded quickly, trying to calm the situation. "Yes, everything's fine. Mom just came for a surprise visit." Victor placed a hand on Emma's shoulder, a seemingly protective gesture that Margaret saw as an assertion of control. "It's good to know you have someone to rely on, Emma," Victor said, looking directly at Margaret, as if warning her not to interfere. After Margaret's unexpected visit, the relationship between mother and daughter became more fragile than ever. Emma was torn between her mother's concern and the apparent security Victor offered. Victor, for his part, sensed the threat Margaret posed to his control over Emma and became even more subtle in his manipulations, making it clear that he wasn't going to let her go easily. That same night, Margaret and Emma attempted to share dinner in the apartment, but the silence between them was more uncomfortable than ever. Margaret struggled to find the right words to approach her daughter without seeming invasive. "How are classes going, honey?" Margaret asked, forcing a smile. "Fine, Mum. Everything's fine," Emma replied, staring at her plate evasively. Margaret knew she couldn't push too hard, but each brief response felt like a wall Emma was building between them. She wanted to say so many things, to warn her that Victor wasn't who he appeared to be, to hug her and tell her that there was still time to get out of this situation. But she also knew that if she pushed too much, her daughter might pull away even further. Victor ensured his influence remained even at a distance. During dinner, Emma received several messages from him, asking if everything was okay and reminding her that he would always be there to support her. Each message was a subtle reminder that, even with her mother present, he remained the person she relied on the most. "Is it him?" Margaret asked softly, not lifting her gaze from her plate. Emma nodded and defensively replied, "Victor just wants to know if I'm okay. You don't have to worry about that, Mom." "I'm not worried that he wants to help you. I'm worried that you feel you can't do anything without him," Margaret retorted, unable to hold back any longer. The tone of the conversation shifted at that moment. Emma placed her cutlery down on the table and crossed her arms, clearly upset. "Mom, why can't you trust that I know what I'm doing? I'm not a child." "It's not a matter of trust, Emma. It's a matter of me seeing things you can't see right now," Margaret replied, trying to keep calm. Emma shook her head, feeling her mother's words were a judgment, a critique of the decisions she had made. She felt trapped between two worlds, one that promised security, albeit uncertain, and another that represented unconditional love, but reminded her of her humble origins. After dinner, while Margaret cleared the table, Emma stepped out onto the balcony to respond to Victor's messages. "Everything okay with your mother? Remember, I'll always be here for you." Emma felt a mix of relief and guilt. Victor always knew exactly what to say to make her feel safe, even if that protection came with invisible chains. "I'm fine. It's just been a long day," she replied, trying to convince herself that she could maintain a balance between both worlds. Without missing a beat, Victor responded, "Don't let anyone make you doubt yourself, not even your mother." That message cast a shadow of doubt over Emma's heart. Victor was pulling her further away from Margaret, and although she knew it deep down, she couldn't break free from that dependence. Before sleeping, Margaret tried to have a more sincere conversation with her daughter. She knew this was one of the last moments she could talk to her face to face without Victor's interference. "Emma, I just want you to know that I'm not here to judge you. I'm here because I love you, and I want you to know that no matter what happens, you'll always have a place with me," Margaret said, her voice filled with sincerity. Emma looked down, feeling that her mother, despite everything, remained her safest refuge. "I know, Mum, but things here are different. I need to find my own path," she replied, not wanting to fully accept the help Margaret was offering. "You don't have to do it alone, honey. I don't want you to think you need someone who controls your life to get ahead," Margaret insisted, placing a hand over her daughter's. For a moment, Emma felt the temptation to open up, to tell her mother everything that was going on. But the fear of judgment, the shame of the choices she had made, and Victor's influence were too strong. "I'm fine, Mum. Just give me time, please," Emma said, forcing a smile. Margaret nodded, although she knew her daughter's words were just a mask to hide the truth. After Margaret's tense visit, Emma found herself trapped between two worlds. Each interaction with her mother made her feel like she was betraying the new lifestyle she had adopted, while Victor became increasingly controlling, disguising his dominance with promises of security and success. The gap between mother and daughter not only grew in distance, but also in unspoken emotions, unresolved resentments, and difficult decisions they both avoided facing. The next day, Emma tried to focus on her studies, but her mind was elsewhere. Every time she thought of her mother, she felt a knot in her stomach. Margaret's words, although spoken with love, had struck a sensitive chord. Was she really making the right decisions? Or was she simply being swept away by someone who had her trapped in an invisible web? During a break in her class, Samantha approached and noticed that something was off. "Are you okay? You seem distracted," she asked, using her mildly condescending but friendly tone. "Yes, just family stuff," Emma said, shrugging, not wanting to provide details. Samantha smiled and gave her a friendly nudge on the shoulder. "Don't worry about that. Sometimes it's better to distance yourself from things that weigh you down, you know. Enjoy this stage. Victor will make sure everything goes well." Samantha's words were tempting but also unsettling. It seemed that everyone around her, directly or indirectly, was pushing her further away from Margaret. That night, Emma received a call from Victor. He, as always, seemed to have an accurate intuition about her feelings. "How do you feel after your mother's visit?" he asked gently. "Confused. I don't know what to do. She doesn't understand that things here aren't easy for me," Emma replied, feeling a mix of frustration and sadness. Victor seized the opportunity to solidify his influence. "What your mother doesn't understand is that this is your time, Emma. You need to focus on your future and surround yourself with people who understand what you want to achieve." Every word was a well-calculated trap, designed to create more distance between Emma and Margaret. "You know you can always count on me, right?" Victor added in a soft voice. "I'm here for you, without judgment." Emma nodded, although she knew Victor was using her to keep her under his control. Every time he intervened, it was as if another wall was erected between her and her mother. In her small apartment, Margaret felt increasingly helpless. The visit to Emma hadn't resolved anything, and worry gnawed at her. However, instead of resigning herself, she decided to take action. One day, Margaret went to the market and sought advice from Ethan. "I need to find out more about that man. There's something about him that doesn't sit right with me. I can't just stand by while Emma drifts further away from me," Margaret said with a mix of determination and fear. Ethan nodded. He also sensed that Victor was a dangerous influence, though he had no concrete proof. "I'll look into it. Maybe I can find something about his past," Ethan promised. Meanwhile, Margaret began reviewing old papers and documents she had kept from the last years with her late husband. There was something familiar about Victor, a feeling she couldn't ignore. She knew that if she found the connection she was looking for, she could save her daughter from a dark future. In her small apartment, Emma was torn between the comfort of Victor's control and her mother's unconditional love. Victor promised her stability, success, and protection, but it became increasingly clear that this protection came at a price. On the other hand, Margaret offered her love and support, but accepting it would mean admitting she had made mistakes and facing the shame of having depended on someone like Victor. One night, while reviewing her notes for an exam, Emma received a message from her mother. "No matter what happens, I'll always be here for you." Emma felt a lump in her throat as she read it. She knew Margaret was sincere, but she also knew that getting closer to her mother meant cutting ties with Victor. And at that moment, she didn't feel strong enough to do that. Days later, Ethan returned with concerning information. He had discovered that Victor had a dark history. He was not just a wealthy man helping vulnerable people. He had been involved in shady dealings that had ruined the lives of several families, including Margaret's. Ethan placed an envelope with documents on Margaret's table. "This man was the one who bankrupted your husband. It was all very discreet, but now it makes sense. He was behind it all," Ethan said gravely. Margaret felt the air leave her lungs. The same man who had destroyed her family years ago was now controlling her daughter's life. Anger and fear mingled in her heart. "I have to show this to Emma before it's too late," Margaret said, gripping the envelope tightly. As Margaret prepared to confront her daughter with the truth, Victor was also taking steps to solidify his control. That night, in a private meeting, he threw Emma a warning disguised as concern. "Sometimes the people we love the most hold us back without meaning to. Your mother wants to protect you, but she doesn't understand that this is your time to move forward. If you let her stop you, you'll lose everything you've gained." Emma felt a shadow of doubt settle over her heart. She knew Victor was right that her mother didn't fully understand her new life, but did she really want to live under his complete control? Emma's internal conflict intensified. She knew she had to make a decision soon, but any path she chose would involve a sacrifice: her independence, her family, or worse, her identity. The discovery of Victor's dark past marked a turning point in Margaret's determination. She knew she couldn't wait any longer. The truth was scarier than she had imagined. The man manipulating her daughter was not only an opportunist, but also the cause of her family's ruin. For days, Margaret rehearsed in her mind how to reveal the truth to Emma. Each mental attempt ended in an argument, tears, or shouting. She knew her daughter wouldn't accept it easily. Victor's control over Emma was not only financial, but also emotional. Margaret had to find a way to show her the reality without pushing her further into that man's arms. Ethan tried to reassure her. "Remember, she's your daughter, Margaret. The bond you share is stronger than anything. She might not understand at first, but in the end, she'll know that everything you do is for her own good." Margaret nodded, gripping the envelope with evidence of Victor's past tightly in her hands. She knew the confrontation would be difficult, but it was the only option. Margaret traveled again to the capital, this time determined to confront the truth with Emma. The journey felt endless. filled with thoughts of what could go wrong. Ethan accompanied her to the entrance of the building where her daughter lived. "You won't be alone, Margaret. I'm here for whatever you need," Ethan said before saying goodbye. With her heart in a knot, Margaret climbed to Emma's apartment and knocked on the door. This time, Emma opened it immediately. The surprise on her face was evident. "Mom, what are you doing here again?" "I need to talk to you, Emma. It's important," Margaret said seriously. Emma frowned, sensing the tension in the air. "Is it about Victor? Because if it is, I don't want to hear it." "Emma, please, just give me a few minutes. Let me explain something you need to know." Emma let Margaret in, although clearly uncomfortable. They both sat on the small sofa in the apartment. Margaret took the documents out of the envelope and placed them on the table. "I need you to read this. I promise everything I'm about to tell you is true," Margaret said, her voice firm but filled with emotion. Emma looked at the papers distrustfully but decided to read them. As she flipped through the pages, her expression slowly changed. The documents revealed how Victor had deceived her father, leading him into a fraudulent investment that ended in the family's ruin. "What? How is this possible?" Emma murmured, feeling her world crumble. "That man isn't who you think he is, daughter. He ruined our lives once, and now he's trying to do the same to you. I can't just sit by and do nothing," Margaret said, placing a hand on Emma's shoulder. The emotional impact was devastating for Emma. Suddenly, everything she had believed about Victor crumbled. Every gesture of kindness, every favor now had a dark, calculated purpose. Emma felt a mix of anger, shame, and sadness. She had let herself be manipulated and had lost her connection with her mother because of a man who didn't deserve her trust. "Why didn't you tell me this sooner?" Emma asked, tears in her eyes. "Because I didn't know until now, daughter. And when I realized it, I came right away." "I can't let him drag you any further away," Margaret replied, hugging her tightly. For the first time in a long time, Emma allowed herself to cry in her mother's arms. She knew she had made mistakes, but she also understood that it wasn't too late to make things right. As Margaret and Emma reconciled, the apartment door suddenly swung open. Victor entered without knocking, with the same confidence he always exuded. But this time, his smile vanished upon seeing Margaret. "What's going on here?" he asked, looking coldly at both women. Emma slowly stood up, feeling anger surge within her. "I knew you were a liar, but I never imagined how far you'd go," she said firmly. Victor frowned, realizing that the truth had come to light. "Emma, you don't know what you're saying. Everything I did was for you. I took care of you when no one else did. But this time, Emma didn't fall for his manipulations." "Not anymore, Victor. I'm not going to keep living under your control." Margaret stood by her daughter's side, supporting her without hesitation. "She's not alone. She never was." Victor tried to regain his influence, but Emma's decision was unbreakable. For the first time, he understood that he had lost control over her. With no other options left, he launched one last veiled threat. "If you distance yourself from me, you'll lose everything you've gained. You have no idea what you're doing." But Emma, now stronger thanks to her mother's support, responded calmly. "I'd rather lose everything than continue being a prisoner." Defeated, Victor left the apartment without saying another word. The sound of the door closing behind him felt like a release for both women. After Victor's expulsion from the apartment, a silence filled with emotions lingered in the air. Mother and daughter, for the first time in a long time, were aligned. Breaking ties with Victor meant more than cutting off a person. It was the first step towards emotional freedom and the restoration of their bond. After Victor left, Emma sat on the edge of her bed, introspective and exhausted. Margaret approached her daughter and sat beside her, offering a comforting silence. "I can't believe what I allowed to happen," Emma murmured, her voice breaking. "Everything he did. and I let him have access to every part of my life. Margaret hugged her tenderly. Honey, we all make mistakes. What matters is that now you see clearly, and that we're together to move forward. You're not alone. Emma allowed herself to cry freely. It was a cry of relief, of released guilt, but also of hope. Despite everything that had happened, her mother was still there, unconditional and steadfast, ready to help her rebuild her life. The next day, Ethan stopped by the apartment to make sure Margaret and Emma were okay. His presence was comforting for both, providing a sense of community and support that they had lost amid the conflicts. "What will you do now?" Ethan asked Emma as he helped her pack some things. "I'm going to cancel whatever debts I can, leave this city, and return to what really matters," Emma replied, her tone filled with renewed determination. "I have to reclaim what I lost." Ethan smiled approvingly. "That sounds good. And you know you'll always have your mother and me for anything you need." Emma felt grateful for that support network. She had forgotten how valuable it was to have genuine people in her life. In the following weeks, Emma began to untangle the financial and emotional ties Victor had woven around her life. It was a painful process, returning things she couldn't pay for, confronting creditors, and severing relationships with people who had been toxic for her. But each step she took toward her independence felt like a silent victory. Margaret, for her part, accompanied her through every difficult moment. She knew that this struggle was both internal and external for her daughter. Watching Emma fight for her freedom gave her hope that despite everything, they had found a path toward redemption. "Mom, thank you for not giving up on me," Emma said one night as they finished packing the apartment. "I would never give up, daughter." "You're the most important thing to me," Margaret replied, tenderly stroking her daughter's face. Finally, Emma decided to leave the city and return to the small town where it all began. She needed time to heal, to reconnect with her roots, and to rediscover herself. She knew that going back to her origins wasn't a step backward, but an opportunity to start anew with the lessons learned. "It won't be easy at first," Margaret warned her as they organized the last boxes. "But you have everything you need to move forward. I'm proud of you, Emma." "I couldn't have done it without you, Mom," Emma replied, feeling that she was finally ready to leave the past behind. On moving day, Victor made one last desperate attempt to regain control. He showed up at the apartment, this time without the calculated calm that usually characterized him. "Emma, you don't have to do this. We can fix everything." "Let's start over," he said, almost pleading. Emma looked at him with compassion, but also firmness. "No, Victor. You no longer have power over me. I'm not the person you once knew." Victor tried one last manipulation. "You'll lose everything if you leave." But this time, Emma was not afraid of losing anything that truly mattered. "What I lost, I have already regained. My freedom and my family." Realizing he could no longer control her, Victor took a step back and left without saying another word. The darkest chapter in Emma's life had finally come to an end. When they arrived in the town, Margaret and Emma found a modest little apartment to start anew. The return was a balm for both of them. The fresh air, familiar faces, and the feeling of being home restored a peace they thought was lost. Emma began working at a local store to save money while resuming her studies online. Each day was a small victory on her path to independence. She knew the road would be long, but this time she wasn't alone. "No matter how long it takes to get there," Margaret said one afternoon while they prepared dinner, "what matters is that we're together." Emma smiled, feeling that for the first time in a long time, everything was in place. As Margaret and Emma tried to rebuild their lives in the town, it seemed that the worst chapter of their story was behind them. However, an unexpected twist was about to shake their lives. The past, although buried, always finds a way to return, and Victor was not willing to let them rest easily. Days went by with apparent tranquility. Emma worked hard at the local store, and although the debts were still present, she was slowly beginning to pay them off. Margaret, for her part, supported her every step of the way, feeling that they were finally reclaiming the life they had longed for. "Little by little, we're moving forward, daughter," Margaret told her as they enjoyed a simple dinner. There was calm in the air, a well-deserved peace after so much suffering. But that peace was destined to be broken. One afternoon, Emma received an unexpected letter. It was from the bank, notifying her that the account Victor had used to help her had her name linked as a co-owner. The debts incurred under that account were now her legal responsibility. Emma felt the ground vanish beneath her feet. "It can't be. This can't be happening," she exclaimed, while Margaret read the letter beside her. "How is it possible that he linked you without your consent?" Margaret asked, feeling the anger boiling within her. Victor hadn't just emotionally manipulated Emma, he had also legally ensnared her. Now, in addition to the personal debts she was trying to pay off, she faced a much larger financial burden, one that could completely destroy her future. That same night, Samantha showed up at their house. Emma, surprised by her visit, greeted her with suspicion. Samantha had played a key role in her fall into Victor's control, and seeing her there, smiling as if nothing had happened, stirred a mix of anger and distrust in Emma. "I needed to see you." "Victor is furious, Emma. He says you betrayed him," Samantha said, crossing her arms with a condescending air. "What do you want, Samantha?" Emma asked, suppressing the urge to slam the door in her face. "I didn't come to threaten you. I just came to warn you. Victor isn't going to let you go so easily. And believe me, he has ways to ensure you pay for what you did." Margaret approached from the kitchen, feeling that the danger she had feared all along was closer than ever. "Tell Victor that we won't fall into his trap again. If he tries anything, he will face the consequences," Margaret said firmly. Samantha smiled dismissively. "Good luck with that, Margaret. Victor always has a plan." With that warning, Samantha left, leaving mother and daughter engulfed in fear and uncertainty. Victor hadn't just returned to their lives, he was willing to drag them back into his web of manipulation. Desperate, Margaret contacted Ethan for help. She knew confronting Victor wouldn't be easy, but she was determined to do whatever it took to protect her daughter. "We need to find a way to nullify those debts," Margaret said, while walking through the town square. Ethan, always willing to help, nodded. "I have a lawyer friend in the city. He could review the documents and see if we can nullify that connection. If Victor included you without your consent, there must be something we can do." Emma, though grateful, still felt the weight of despair. "What if we can't? What if I can never free myself from this?" Ethan looked at her with a warm smile. "There's always a way out, Emma. We're not alone in this. We'll face it together." As Ethan sought the lawyer's help, an unexpected event shook the town. The news announced that Victor had been arrested for financial fraud. Several victims had filed complaints, and the police had begun a deep investigation against him. All his assets were frozen, and his reputation was ruined. Emma and Margaret, stunned by the news, sat in front of the television, unable to believe what they were seeing. "This is real." "Is it over?" Emma asked, feeling that for the first time, justice was on her side. "Not yet. We need to ensure those debts disappear too," Margaret said cautiously, knowing that although Victor was out of the game, the consequences of his actions still affected them. Despite his arrest, Victor managed to send a message to Emma from jail. It was his last attempt to instill fear. "Don't think this is over. I always leave a mark on those who betray me." That message served as a reminder that Victor, even in his downfall, remained a danger. Emma felt the anguish return, but this time she was unwilling to be defeated. "I'm not going to live in fear. It's over, Mom. This is my moment to be truly free," Emma said with a firmness she had never shown before. With Victor behind bars, it seemed the threat had dissipated, but the debts and the last traces of his influence continued to haunt Emma. It was time to face the aftermath and ensure that no ties remained binding her to the past. Margaret and Ethan quickly mobilized to contact Ethan's lawyer friend, knowing that this final battle would define Emma's future. Days later, the lawyer, Gregory, arrived in town to meet with Margaret, Emma, and Ethan. He reviewed the documents linked to the joint accounts Victor had opened. His expression hardened as he detected several irregularities. "Victor used your identity without consent, Emma. This is a fraud by impersonation," Gregory explained, taking notes. "Does that mean I can annul the debts?" Emma asked with a mix of hope and anxiety. Gregory nodded. "Yes, but we'll have to fight it in court. The good news is that with the ongoing investigation into his crimes, the authorities will be on our side. We'll clear your name, Emma." The news gave them a breath of hope. For the first time in months, they saw a clear way out. The shadow of Victor began to fade, but there was still one last push needed for definitive freedom. As the legal process advanced, Emma received a troubling notice. A partner of Victor had attempted to withhold funds from the joint accounts to demand payment. Even though Victor was behind bars, his web of influence remained active. "They can't control us, Mom," Emma said firmly. "We're not the same anymore." Ethan also stood resolutely by her side. No one was going to intimidate them or make them retreat. They had endured too much to give up now. Finally, the day of the trial arrived. It was the culmination of months of struggle, sacrifice, and pain. Emma entered the courtroom with her head held high, flanked by Margaret and Ethan, feeling the strength that only true love and friendship could offer. During the hearing, Emma's lawyer presented irrefutable evidence of Victor's fraud, demonstrating that the young woman had been manipulated and deceived. Statements from other victims also reinforced her case. Every word she heard was a reminder of everything she had endured, but also of her growth. Finally, the judge issued his verdict. It is proven that Emma was a victim of fraud. All debts incurred in her name are annulled. Tears streamed from Emma's and Margaret's eyes. The nightmare was finally over. As they exited the courtroom, Ethan was waiting for them with open arms. It was a moment of celebration, but more than that, it was a moment of liberation. Emma had finally reclaimed her life. "We did it," Emma whispered, embracing her mother. "You did it, daughter. You fought for your freedom and achieved it." "I'm so proud of you," Margaret replied, feeling a peace she hadn't experienced in a long time. Back in the town, Emma decided to resume her online studies and start a small entrepreneurial project she had always dreamed of, opening a store for handmade products. The store would be a symbol of everything she had learned, a space to create and grow. Ethan, always willing to help, offered to be her partner. The friendship they had forged amid difficulties had become an invaluable connection. "This is just the beginning, Emma. The future is yours to build as you wish." With the trial resolved and the debt annulled, Emma's and Margaret's lives took a new direction. The weight of the past faded with each passing day, and they began to experience a freedom that had long seemed impossible. But it wasn't just about having defeated Victor. It was about finding a new way to live, to dream, and to move forward without fear. The opening of the artisan store was a simple yet significant event for Emma. It was a symbol of her personal rebirth, a project that reflected her true identity, free from the masks and expectations she had felt in the city. "This is just the beginning," Emma said with a smile as she hung the open sign on the door. Ethan and Margaret were there to support her, as always. The small space quickly filled with neighbors and friends who wanted to wish her luck. The town welcomed her back with open arms, giving her a sense of belonging that she had never found elsewhere. Among the products were candles, soaps, and small handmade decorations crafted by Emma. Each item was unique, a tangible representation of her new chapter. "It's not about how much we sell," Margaret told her. "What matters is that you're building something of your own, something true." Even though Victor was in the past, Emma still grappled with emotional scars. The nights were sometimes difficult, and dark thoughts returned from time to time. But instead of ignoring them, she had learned to face them. She knew she didn't have to do it alone. She had her mother and Ethan by her side. One afternoon, while Margaret helped her organize some things in the store, Emma expressed for the first time what she had kept in her heart. "Sometimes I wonder how I could let him control me so much. I feel so foolish." Margaret stopped what she was doing and sat next to her. "You're not foolish, daughter. You are just someone searching for her way. We all make mistakes, but the important thing is to learn from them and move forward. And you are doing that." Margaret's words were like balm for Emma's soul. She finally understood that she couldn't change the past, but she could choose how to live the future. A few days later, while Emma was organizing products in the store, she received an unexpected letter. It was from lawyer Gregory, who had been closely following Victor's investigation. In the letter, Gregory explained that authorities had found several properties acquired fraudulently by Victor, and that as part of the restitution, Emma was entitled to financial compensation. "Is this real?" Emma asked, showing the letter to her mother. "It is," Margaret replied, smiling with pride. "After so much suffering, justice is finally on your side." Emma felt a mix of emotions: relief, gratitude, and hope. The compensation was not just money. It was an opportunity to keep growing without the fear of the past. She knew that the money wouldn't erase the scars, but it would allow her to build the future she had always dreamed of. As time went on, the friendship between Emma and Ethan naturally evolved. Ethan had always been there to support her without asking for anything in return, and as the months passed, a deeper connection began to bloom between them. One night, after closing the store, Ethan invited her for a walk around the town. The fresh air and the starry sky created the perfect setting. "You know, I never thought I would be so happy coming back to the town," Emma said as they walked together. Ethan smiled. "I think happiness doesn't depend on the place, but on the people we share the journey with." They exchanged silent glances, understanding that the bond they had created was more than friendship. Without haste or expectations, they began to walk toward a new stage together. One night, while Emma and her mother shared a quiet dinner in their small apartment, Margaret handed her a letter she had written some time ago. "It's something I wrote during the toughest moments, when I thought I had lost you," Margaret said, giving her the letter with a warm smile. Emma opened it and read aloud. "No matter how far you go or how difficult the road may be, I will always be here for you. Because a mother's love knows no limits or conditions, and I know that no matter what happens, you will always find your way back home." Tears streamed down Emma's face. In that moment, she understood that no matter the mistakes of the past, she had always had a home and a family that loved her unconditionally. "Thank you for not giving up on me, Mom," Emma said, hugging her tightly. "I would never do that, daughter. You are my life." Now, 10 years had passed since the darkest moments in Emma's and Margaret's lives. The sacrifices, tears, and sleepless nights were behind them, replaced by silent victories and a prosperity they had never imagined. Emma had turned her modest artisan store into a business empire, with branches in major cities across the country. Each product she designed continued to reflect the authentic essence she had learned to value: honesty, love, and gratitude for the little moments. Now she was a powerful woman, financially independent and emotionally strong. However, her greatest success was not her fortune, but the relationship she had built with her mother. Margaret remained her pillar, her emotional compass. Time had only strengthened their bond. But there was something still pending in Emma's heart, an act of love that symbolized everything her mother had done for her. It was time to repay Margaret for the greatest sacrifice she had made, selling their house so Emma could study. Now, fate had given her the chance to close that chapter in the best possible way. One night, while reviewing her company's balances from home, Emma paused to think about the long journey they had taken together. The image of Margaret signing the papers for the sale of the house, heartbroken but determined to secure a future for her, remained vivid in her memory. "It's time to do what I always dreamed of, Mom. This time, the house will be for you," Emma whispered to herself, feeling a mix of excitement and gratitude. Without wasting any time, she called her real estate agent and gave him a clear mission: find the perfect house. It wasn't about meaningless luxury, but about a home that reflected everything Margaret deserved: warmth, comfort, a garden where she could grow her flowers, and spaces to enjoy life's little pleasures. For weeks, Emma meticulously reviewed every proposal. She rejected options that were too ostentatious. What she sought was not to impress, but to give her mother a place where she could feel at peace and free. Finally, she found the perfect house, a property on the outskirts of town, surrounded by trees, with large windows letting in sunlight, and a garden full of potential for Margaret to plant her favorite flowers. There was something special about that house. Its cozy style reminded Emma of the happy moments of her childhood, when Margaret would swing her in the garden of their old home. The emotional connection was immediate. She knew that this was the house she had been searching for. "This is it. This is the home my mother deserves," she said decisively to the real estate agent. Emma organized everything with precision. The purchase was made in cash, and she requested that the furniture and decor reflect the simple yet elegant style she knew Margaret would love. Every detail was carefully selected, from the books she placed on the shelves to the cushions on the sofa. She even installed a swing in the garden as a nod to their shared past. Her excitement grew in her heart with each step she took. She knew that her mother had never expected anything in return for the sacrifice she had made. But this gift wasn't just a house. It was a way to repay what she had lost, to show her that all her love and effort had borne fruit. One sunny afternoon, Emma invited Margaret for a walk around the town. She didn't reveal where they were going or what she had planned. Margaret, always trusting her daughter, accepted with a smile, unaware of what was about to unfold. Upon arriving at the property, Margaret curiously gazed at the beautiful house in front of which Emma had parked the car. The lush trees, the fresh air, and the flowers in the garden gave her an immediate sense of calm, but she didn't understand why they were there. "What are we doing here, honey?" Margaret asked with an intrigued smile. Emma took a deep breath, feeling the excitement bubbling within her. She held the house keys in her hands and handed them to her mother. "Mum, this house is yours. I bought it for you." Margaret was left speechless. She looked at the keys in her hand, then at Emma, and finally at the house in front of her. Tears began to roll down her cheeks as she tried to process what her daughter was telling her. "What? Is this really for me?" Margaret asked, trembling with emotion. "Yes, Mom. It's your home. I know you never expected anything in return, but I never forgot what you did for me. You sold our house so I could study, asking for nothing in return. Today, I want to give you back what you lost and provide you with the home you've always deserved." Margaret burst into tears, hugging her daughter with all her might. In those moments, all the difficulties they had faced faded away. It was a moment of redemption, of deep and sincere love. "I didn't need a house, daughter. All I ever wanted was to see you happy. But this means more than I can express. I know you didn't need anything, Mom, but I wanted you to have this place. This is the home you deserve, and it will always be our refuge." Ethan, who had accompanied both women during this special moment, watched from a distance with a warm smile. He knew this was one of those moments that define a life, and he felt privileged to be part of it. Margaret explored every corner of the house, touching the furniture and feeling the walls, as if she wanted to ensure that everything was real. The swing in the garden made her smile through her tears. It was a reminder of the tough times, but also of the love that had always held them together. That night, they celebrated on the terrace of the house, enjoying a simple yet meaningful dinner. There were laughter, memories, and promises for the future. Life had thrown them many tests, but it had also rewarded them with love, success, and the certainty that, together, they could overcome anything. The story of Emma and Margaret is much more than a narrative of challenges and triumphs. It is an ode to unconditional love, silent sacrifice, and the power of forgiveness. Margaret, like so many mothers in the world, showed that true love is not measured by what is received, but by what is given without expecting anything in return. Her sacrifice, selling her own house to give her daughter a chance, was an act of faith, a leap into the void, convinced that the greatest wealth is seeing our loved ones reach their dreams. A mother's love is like a beacon that lights up even the darkest paths. It is the voice that whispers in moments of doubt, "You are not alone. I will always be here." It is that embrace that remains, even when life drags us away, and that outstretched hand ready to hold us, even if we have made mistakes. It is the kind of love that knows no limits or conditions. Margaret never sought recognition for her sacrifices. All she ever wanted was for Emma to find happiness. But in the end, life taught them both that true love always finds a way to return. Just as Margaret had given everything for her daughter, Emma found her way back to her mother, not only to thank her, but to return the home that had once been lost. The greatest lesson from this story is that there is no greater triumph than the one shared with those we love. Houses, businesses, and success can be built and lost, but a mother's love remains constant, immune to time and difficulties. It is that love that holds us up when everything seems to collapse, that gives us hope in the darkest moments, and that guides us toward redemption. At the end of the day, Emma's greatest fortune was not her financial success, but her mother's unwavering love. A love that sought no recognition or glory, but simply the well-being of her daughter. And in that love, they both found not only their refuge, but the certainty that the safest home will always be in the hearts of those who love us unconditionally. Because in the end, a house can be lost, but a mother's love is forever. Thank you for joining us in this emotional story. Remember that love and family ties are the greatest treasures we can have. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring stories. See you in the next video. Take care and keep building unforgettable moments with those you love.